Welcome back to Genesis 4. We're in verse 13 for this video, and in the prior two verses, we saw God's pronunciation of judgment upon Cain for his murdering of Abel, and now we're going to see Cain's response. It's a fairly short verse, but there's some interesting translational stuff going on towards the end, so let's take a look. Ke apen Cain, proston kyrion, mezon he aitia mu, tu aphethenai me. Well, let's start with this first verb, ape, and of course, this is our third singular aorist active indicative of lego here. And so Cain is the one speaking. So, and Cain said, and then we have proston kyrion, to the Lord. So now that's introducing this reported speech. And it starts with mezon. And mezon is the comparative form of mega. So this would be something like too great or greater than or greater, something along those lines. We got to find out what the rest of it is. And the nominative here is aitia, and aitia means blame. It can also mean responsibility. Could mean guilt. And so, and it's my. So my blame, my guilt is too great. Something like that with the mezon. So that's probably how we'd start things out. And then we have tu aphethenai. Now, you'll notice this is an articular infinitive. You got a theni ending. This is from aphiemi. This happens to be an aorist passive infinitive. You see that theta, eta, plus the ni there. And so aphiemi means to forgive. Then you, at the end, you have a me here. Now, it's important to remind ourselves, we've seen this in a few other videos, that this me here is not going to function as a traditional accusative, as the direct object or something like that. And an infinitive clause, it's going to function as the sort of pseudo-subject of the infinitive phrase. So the way we would translate this would be something like, my guilt is too great for me to be forgiven. Aphiemi means to be forgiven in the passive, something like that. So here Cain is saying, my guilt for killing my brother is too great to be forgiven, implied by God. Now, that translation is probably going to sound a little bit unfamiliar if you're used to the English translation derived from the Hebrew. And this is the Hebrew from the Masoretic. So we're not 100% sure whether the translator of Genesis 4:13 is drawing on a text like that, but there's no reason to think he wasn't. Typically, the Genesis translator is pretty word for word in the Septuagint, but in this case, there's a little bit of interpretive flexibility. In the Hebrew, it's gadol, avoni, menasah. And so most translators are going to take this. The gadol, that works. That's the mezon. That's fine. The menasah here does typically mean to bear, to lift up, and it can be related to aphiemi. That's not that unusual. The weird thing here is avoni. That typically means iniquity. Or some sort of sin or transgression. But most of your English translations are going to say my punishment. And most likely that's because they're trying to pick up on the sense of it, not necessarily trying to be word for word. But either way, like the ESV, NIV, NASB, and a bunch of others will say something like my punishment is too great to bear, as opposed to my sin is too much to be forgiven, or for me to be forgiven. You see, there's quite a big difference here in the Septuagint rendering. The typical English translations from the Hebrew place the weight on the punishment that God has pronounced not being sufferable by Cain, whereas the Greek translator, assuming he is operating from something like this, is taking it more in the direction of my sin is so great that God cannot forgive me. Now, it's worth pointing out, if we look at some of the other translation options for that particular Hebrew word, assuming that is the word, we do have a few Greek manuscripts that say hamartia, and that would be more natural than aitia here. That would be a more normal rendering avoni. And then Aquila has anomima, which is lawless deed or something like that. And so you can see that these two options probably support the early nature of this particular reading. And so in this case, my sense would be that the Genesis translator into Greek has taken a little bit of interpretive license and taken in the direction of the forgiveness of sin as opposed to whether you can endure a particular punishment. So even though it's a short verse, pretty interesting stuff here in the interpretive tradition. So that's Genesis 4:13.